Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Cammy is off tonight. The teenager charged with 13 felonies in relation to a bonfire explosion in the Pulaski area will spend at least 6 months in jail. Shawano County judge sentenced 18-year-old Samuel Armstrong to a year in jail, 6 months of initial confinement with Huber, and 6 months stayed unless he violates probation. His jail time will be followed by 5 years of probation with several contingencies, including absolute sobriety and a written apology written to the victims. Brittany Schmidt has more from Shawano after listening to victim statements today.
Bill, while the victims and their families want Armstrong to be held responsible for his reckless actions, they also offered Armstrong forgiveness and hope he learns from his mistakes and goes on to be a contributing member of society. Those who took the stand today during his sentencing made sure Armstrong knew the impact of his actions. Several parents, tearful at times, described the heartbreak of seeing their child in so much pain and the trauma they all endured through the tough recovery. Several victims suffered second and third degree burns and spent months in the hospital. For the first time today, we got a glimpse into the aftermath of the bonfire explosion. The prosecution pointing out the intensity and recklessness of Armstrong's actions. The explosion ring spans several feet. Lawn chairs are melted, even highlighting some of the clothes of victims. The trauma the victims and their families lived through will stay with them the rest of their lives. But their anger won't linger forever, as they all offer forgiveness, something the judge says is rare.
And I heard a lot of people say they forgive you. And I think you're a lucky person for that. In court, I always make notes when people apologize. And I almost never hear people say they forgive someone. And I heard it at least, 5 times today. So I take that into account as well.
Armstrong, tearful himself, did not address the court today, but his defense attorney did read an apology note. He has to report to jail on May 30th by 8 p.m. That date was picked so that Armstrong could walk for his high school graduation. Reporting in Shawano, Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.